To give you a little backstory, not much of one, but a little bit, we were traveling, nomads, when we decided we wanted to live off-grid, buy a piece of property. So we went down to Texas for the winter. That I guess it was 2020 or 2019, it doesn't matter. But in August, we decided we wanted to live off-grid, and by January, we found this place. This was not our first stop. What drug us out of Texas was a 10-acre piece of property way down in southeast Missouri next to the National Forest. And it didn't work out. There were several things that it just didn't work out. But I'm beginning to think that's where I needed to live. That would have been better based on the information I found out today. It had 10 acres. It had a well, and it had a stream that ran through. And I thought this would be perfect. It had lots of trees. It would have been perfect. But like I said, there were some things wrong with it. It didn't have a drive, so we'd have spent another several $1,000s just so we could get the truck into the place. I guess the road construction crew, MoDOT or somebody, had tore out the drive because it had a cabin. The cabin had fallen down. But there was lots of trees, 10 acres. Never would have had to leave. There wasn't any internet either. And at the time, I had a job, a company, a business that I was running that required that I have internet. Plus YouTube. Now, I know a lot of people don't think YouTube is a job, but it pays pretty well for it not being a job. So I wanted to make sure that I could get videos uploaded. So there was no internet there as far as cell phones. So we would have had to have hooked up some sort of cable, and that would have taken more power, more energy. Now, I had planned on using some sort of turbine that I could put in the water to generate electric. And if you really think about it, that would, in my mind, be the way to go. If you get a couple turbines, 200 watts or so, it would produce electric all day long, all night long, constantly, just never stop. So it wouldn't be like solar panels, like on cloudy days, you don't make any electric, so you got to rely on batteries. And then on sunny days, it would charge the batteries, and you'd have to, it's just, there's a lot of issues with solar panels. But I could have done both, although there were so many trees there, I don't know if I really would have done a lot of solar panels. But I could have gotten a couple turbines, had lots of electric, and wouldn't have had to have that many batteries, if any. It had a well, like this one. There was a flaw in my thinking. I was thinking that I was going to draw water out of that stream. Now, the stream probably was dirty because there was drives going through the stream, all up and down the road. You can see people had built their driveway right through the stream, so that means it had oil and crud in it. It would have been difficult to clean. The water would have been difficult to clean. But I didn't know anything about wells. So I took the easy road in my mind, and we'd just take water from the stream. I'm telling you, this was a better option. Hands down, guaranteed a better option. I'm glad we did this. I'm glad I learned about this. This well is 100 feet deep, and you can power it with a 110 volt pump. So the pump looks much like this one. This is the motor, the electric motor down here. This is where the water comes in at, and this is the pump, pumps it up. So once I got here, we ran a string down with a cup on it to figure out how deep it was. Figured out how much water was in it, and I started learning everything I could learn about wells. Well, when we got here, then I had to build all this and clean it up, make it better, because rainwater would just run right down into the hole. I mean, that's all there was, just a hole down here. Of course, I built up the concrete 6 inches, built this building around it, got ditches so water would run away from, the rainwater would run away from it. Now, one of the things that I've learned about wells is the deeper they are, the more power you need to pump. So like I said, this one's only 100 feet deep. It's still considered a deep well. It goes down into bedrock. It's getting bedrock water. But they can go down to 600 feet. So a smaller pump like this is less than a horsepower. I think it's a 3/4 horsepower pump. This one here, both of them. So you have too much weight of water for it to push up. So you have to get a stronger pump, a bigger pump. Well, then you have to go into 220 volt, because you're running too many amps. I don't want to get in a big conversation about electric, but the more amps you have, the thicker the wire you have to have. And eventually 110 wouldn't even pull it, because your plug-in, I think, is 15 amps. It could be 20 amps, but whatever it is. Once you got beyond that, you wouldn't even be able to use your plug-in anymore. So it'd be too much. So then you go into 220. So now you have 220 with fewer amps, 220 volt, fewer amps. So the way you calculate wattage, this is an 800 watt pump. So the way you calculate it is 110 times, let's just call it 8 amps just for ease of conversation. So 110 volts times 8 amps equals 880 watts. 8 amps is pretty high for your plug-in, for the wiring. So eventually, when you get up too many amps, then you're going to have to switch to 220, and then you can go 220 times 4 amps equals 880 watts. That's how you reduce it. The problem is, I didn't know back then that you could buy inverters. That's what I have, a power inverter. So the power inverter takes DC electric, so battery electric, like DC electric in your car, 12 volts in my case, and it inverts it into AC, house electric, 110 volts. Well, you can buy 220 volt inverters. They don't have a lot of amps, but you wouldn't need a lot of amps. 4 amps, but you need 220. I've also had theories on how you could wire, maybe you get two 110 volt inverters and you could run it that way. I don't want to get too complicated. So when you're living off grid, people will talk about solar powered wells. I'm not a big fan of them. They're way expensive, and I just don't see the point. You got to have batteries and everything. I mean, if you had a farm out there in the middle of nowhere and you didn't have electric running to it, and you didn't need electric, you just needed electric for the pump, solar panel powered pump would be fine, I think. But in my case, this is cheap. I can go on Amazon, pick it up for 150 bucks. And they work great. The 110 worked for me because it's a shallow well. But if you got too deep, then of course you have to upgrade to 220. So in my mind, why not just get the AC pump? Because solar can't go that deep, the solar power pumps. Solar power has the same principle. Eventually, you're going to have too many amps going down the wire. Now, the longer the wire and the thicker the wire is going to have to be. So this goes down 100 feet, plus there's another 100 feet that runs down the shed, so that's 200 feet of wire. If it gets too long, you'll start to heat up the wire with all the amps if you don't calculate it out right. So having a DC pump, so let's say you had a 24 volt pump, and you're running a ton of amps through that. So you can pump up water. Well, eventually you'll just get too deep and you won't be able to do it at all with solar. So this is a better option in my mind. When I got here, I guess I was kind of lucky in a couple aspects. I don't know if luck's really the word I want to use, but luck, for lack of a better word. One, it forced me to learn how to operate and work a well. Had to learn about well pumps, had to learn about how water goes in it, had to learn about well casings. This well casing has a crack in it, so I had to put a well liner in it. And it was a lot to learn, but I'm glad I learned it. Not that I'll ever dig another well or need another well, but I've learned a lot about this. And now I've got it to pretty much perfection. It really is providing a lot of water for us. So what I do now is I just pump water. I turn on the solar panels. I pump water from here into the IBC tank. That way at nighttime, I don't have to run this at all. Or in cloudy days, I don't have to run it. Now, of course, I could run it on this little generator. That's another advantage. I didn't have to buy a huge generator to run my well pump. This is a little 2500 watt, and this one, before it died, was 2000 watts. And both of them ran it. Where some of these bigger ones, you would have to have maybe even 5000 watt. I mean, it would be pretty significant because your wattage is going up the deeper you go. So I lucked out there too. It was deep enough that it was considered a deep well, but shallow enough that I would have made a mistake. I think I would have made a mistake if it was any deeper. I probably would have went ahead and got this pump and put it down in there, and it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have been enough pressure. Now, one of the advantages I would have had is the deeper you go, the slower the pump is going to pump. So since I have to throttle this down so much anyways, I really have to throttle it down, otherwise the recovery rate of the well is only 5 gallons a minute, but the pump is 15 gallons a minute. So I turn this way down so water just barely comes out. So I could probably go down another 200 or 300 feet and I wouldn't even need to throttle it down, because it would automatically be throttled down on its own because of the weight. It would be slower. But this all worked out really well. A lot of luck and a lot of learning, and here's what we got. But I found out that this is all wrong. We got to move. We're going to have to move right away, actually, if we want to live off grid. I was on Facebook today and on a group. I don't even get on these groups anymore. I was just scrolling through my Facebook page. I haven't done this in forever. And this guy says, here's what you have to have, not you might want to consider. You have to have this in order to live off grid. When you buy property, it has to be 200 miles away from any city. Huh. Well, I'm disqualified right there. I think Kansas City is 150 miles away from me. You have to be 200 miles away from a military base. Well, I'm disqualified there too. And I feel like I'm pretty isolated out here. I mean, we're 20 miles from a Walmart in either direction. So I feel like I'm pretty isolated. A hospital is probably 40 miles in either direction. So, I mean, we're really isolated, and I'm not isolated enough. And the place has to be at least 10 acres. It has to have trees, and it has to be covered in trees. And it has to have a stream or creek in it. That was the criteria in order to live off grid. Well, I feel like I live off grid, and I haven't met any of those criteria, not one. And he explains, well, you got to have water, and the only way you get water when you're off grid is in a stream or creek. Really? I didn't know that. Then what am I? What is this? I don't run it on a utility company. I run it off solar panels. So that's not off grid. And then he says you have to have the trees. So I would imagine that's his problem. He has to have a stream because he's got trees. He can't have solar panels to have a well. And of course, then he said he had to have 10 acres. Well, I don't even understand any of this. I don't know what his definition of off grid is. And that's what's really troublesome. I get this all the time in the comment section, that you're only off grid if you live on Mars. That's the only way you can live off grid, because there is no place on the planet, unless you're like in Alaska or maybe the Amazon, where you could do what he's saying. The price of this property would be outrageous. I mean, it's not even feasible. But I get this in the comment section all the time. Oh, you don't live off grid. There's too much traffic. You live by a road. Well, how do you get to your place if there's no road to get to? Well, I guess you got to do horse and buggy. Somebody actually said in a YouTube video about me that I don't live off grid because I have a pickup truck. But then he mentioned another off-gridder who has a pickup truck. So I don't understand. I mean, I think they just nitpick one channel over another or whatever it is. My definition of off-grid is not being tied to the utilities, not being forced to pay for a utility. There's just a lot of reasons for this for me. Utility companies can get kind of pricey. And when you're on a grid, you start hooking things up, a coffee maker and air conditioning, and you get spoiled. And I'm totally self-reliant. The other day, the electric went down. I didn't know. So I can continue on. I can still have water. I've never been inconvenienced here. And I've never been inconvenienced by a utility company. I stayed at Mom's house one time in our camper. The city had a main break. We didn't have any water. Here's a company that is providing you with a service, and they're charging you for the service, and they're not providing the service. One of the things that always aggravated me when I, like cable or internet, is they'll have problems and they shut down your TV for, I don't know, even an hour or a day. But they still charge you the same amount, $50 a month, whatever it was. I mean, sure the prices went up since I paid for it. I don't agree with utility companies. I'm supposed to go out in the middle of nowhere. And for what? What is the purpose? There are people who think you got to grow your own food and do it all. You have to be completely self-reliant in order to be off-grid. And that's just not feasible. It's not even possible. You could not have enough hours in the day to do all the things these people say you should be doing. I came out here to relax, to reduce my cost so I didn't have to work very hard. I mean, I still make money, but I don't have to work near as hard as I used to. This is the life. This is what you're supposed to be doing. So if you click this up next box, it'll take you to a video where I was talking about the reason I live off grid. So I hope I can inspire you to define your dreams when you're living your dreams. Thanks for watching.